Hey guys, it's the Chad, your C10 truck nerd. Well, today is part 2 of my series on what things were year specific on a 67 to 72 Chevy C10. Well, in our first video, we went through and checked out my buddy Kurt's 67 long bed, and we found over 30 year specifics to 67 alone. Well, in today's video, we're gonna go through and check out my buddy Jeremy's 1968 Chevy C10 long bed that he calls El Guapo. Translation, the handsome one. You know, I kind of think he might have named this one after me. Probably not. Well, first off, I want to give a big shout out to my buddy Jeremy for letting me borrow El Guapo for a few days. Unfortunately, he was out of town and couldn't be in today's video, but this old C10 has got to be one of my favorites in our truck club because it's light green, code 503. It's a 68. It's just got beautiful patina, and it's probably got the best static drop I've ever seen on one of these long beds. Now, Jeremy bought this back in 2017 for $750 and drove this old turd home. Now, it looked nothing like it does today. It had an inline 250, 3 on the tree, and it was pretty rough. Now, he spent the next few years going through and completely rebuilding the suspension, put a rebuilt 350, turbo 350, new gear set in the back, and completely went through and restored the interior. And you know what? He drives this truck. Now, I wish I could own this one. It looked pretty sweet in my garage for the last few days, but unfortunately, I got to give it back in a couple days. But why don't we go through and show you guys what things were year specific on a 1968 Chevy C10. Well, in 1968, GM produced about 325,000 C10s, and of those, 2/3 were long beds. That left about 100,000 shorties there, but of that, only 46,000 were 68 fleet sides. So if you do find a 68 that's all original, you might hang on to them because they're starting to thin out. Well, the 1968 model year looked very similar to 67, and that's kind of how the Action Line series worked. The trucks were similar in 67 and 8, 69 and 70, and 71 and 72, but the 68 model year, even though it looks similar to the 68, there is a tremendous amount of differences. So let's start here at the front end. Well, in 1968, the C10 came in 3 different models: the base, the custom, or the custom sport truck, also known as the CST. Now, Jeremy's truck here, it started its life as a base model, but he's kind of cloned it into being a custom as he's worked on it the last several years. Now, the 68 model year, it looked very similar to the 67s. They continued to have this gorgeous slant nose hood that said Chevrolet across the front end. But you'll notice on the 68, you could have got this stainless trim on the front leading edge of the hood, and that would have coincided with the side fender eyebrow trim, the stainless headlight buckets, and the stainless hoops in the grille, which I think look really good. Now, in 68, they changed the grille up a little bit. It's the same grille itself, but it's the way they painted it. 1967, the grille would have been painted the body color, and you'll see in 1968, they went and started painting them off-white, and there were some 68s that were painted argent silver, and that was to tie in with the bumpers, the wheels, and the rear bumper in the back. Now, I'm not gonna say there's not, 68s out there painted body color from the factory, but the majority of them should have been this off-white color. Now, another difference you would notice is with the park lights or turn signals. In 1967, when you pulled the park lights on, they would turn on. When you pulled them all the way out to the headlights, the park lights or turn signals would shut off. Now, they corrected this in 1968 to where the park lights would stay on with the headlights illuminated as well. Now, when we move to the fenders, they're pretty much the same aesthetically. They have a recession cut out in the front to line up with this front grille, but you'll notice they actually have a side marker. Now, this isn't a lamp, it's just a side marker that the feds required for safety issues because these trucks were long and going through intersections, this just gave you a little bit more visibility. Now, this fender in 68 is a year specific to Chevrolet because it had that side marker. In 1969, the front edge of these fenders changed a little bit. So again, this is a year specific to a Chevrolet, but a fun little fact is a 1968 Chevy fender will fit a 1968 to 72 GMC. Now the side of the fenders in 68 were very similar to a 67. It had the same fender badging with the red bow tie and a 10, 20, or 30 to signify what series of truck it was. Jeremy's here has the lower trim, the 67, 68 trim. This was something he added to his truck because it was a base model. But with Chevrolets, there was a black pinstripe in the middle of that trim. But if it was a 68 GMC, the pinstriping would have been red, but you know, we're not going to get into the GMCs. Another option you could have had in 68 was a painted striping on the top side of the fender. They didn't have upper trim back then, so you could have ordered that painted striping down the side. Now when it came to the wheels on a 68, they would have been painted argent silver unless it was a 1-ton, a dually, or a 4-wheel drive, and then they would have been painted black. Now at that time, this was a 4-wheel drum brake setup, and it would have been a 6 on 5.5 bolt pattern for the Chevys and GMCs. Now when we talk about the cabs of these old trucks, there was some significant changes between 67 and 68, but if we just start with the doors first, there were very minimal ones. If it was a base model, you would have had no badging or signifiers of what series it was, but a custom and a CST would have had this badging right outside the windows on the driver and passenger side. The one change that they did have was the exterior door handles. Now 67s were year specific. You couldn't tell them looking from the outside any differences, but it was just the angle that the bolt went into the handle itself. But again, they're all interchangeable over the 6 years. Now Jeremy's truck's got this pretty cool option, which are the junior RV mirrors. These are factory, that's on his SPID. I haven't seen these very often. This truck is pretty dang original other than a few upgrades there. When we talk about the paint on the exterior of these trucks, that was a big change too. A two-tone truck in 1967 would have only had the top of the cab painted. It wouldn't have had the drip edge. Now in 68, they changed things up where the whole top of the cab would have been off-white, the drip edge, the top of the doors, and the A-pillar there. I kind of like the 67s. It was just something a little bit different. But if you're ever looking for doors on trucks, it helps tell you, is this a 67 or 68 door? And that just may be by how it's painted. Now GM offered 14 paint combinations at that time. And in 1968, that was the 50th anniversary of a Chevrolet truck. So they went through and introduced the 50th anniversary paint scheme on that, which was an off-white and gold color, which was pretty dang cool. If you ever stumble across one of those, I'd highly recommend that you snag it up. Well, another change of the cabs in 1968 was the introduction of the big back window being a standard feature. In 67, all the trucks would have came with a small back window unless it was optioned or somebody ordered the bigger panoramic view, and truly, it didn't cost any more money, but that wasn't something that was ordered very often. Whereas in 68, due to safety concerns about visibility, they said, hey, you have to have these in 10, 20s, and 30s. But if it was a medium duty truck, your C50s and up, you could continue to get a cab with a small window, and I think that was just to protect you from stuff flying in the back window and, you know, decapitating you. Well, in 1968, Chevrolet had several different wheelbases to choose from, but when it came to beds, it would have been a 6.5-foot short bed, an 8-foot long bed, but also in 1968, that was the introduction of the Longhorn series, which would have been an 8.5-foot bed, but that only would have been in the 20s and 30s series. But that was just a way for Chevrolet to have the longest truck bed on the market at the time, so you could fit the biggest drop-in camper out there, which was kind of cool, but they looked really super, super long there. Well, a lot of folks will ask me, were the beds year specific? And they absolutely were. If you found one in 1967, it would have had no side marker cutout, and that's a pretty telltale sign. But a 1968 may be a little bit harder to determine, but if you look down here at the bottom trim, if you find a bed that has the smaller, lower trim and a side marker cutout, that would have been a 1968. Another indicator would have been the bezels that go around the taillights here. If it just goes on the outside edge, that would have been a 67 or 68 trim piece only. 69 to 72s would actually went all the way around the taillight and the reverse light. Now the tailgates were also something that were pretty year specific. 67 had their own, but a 68 was a little bit different, but I'm gonna have to pop this so you can take a look. So if we look at the tailgate first, in 1967, their year specific tailgate would have had what I call this speed bump that went all the way around the entire tailgate. But you can see here in 1968 that the speed bump has this little skip in it which helps indicate that this is not a 1967 bed. Now on the back of Jeremy's, you can see that this has the wood floor. Well, in 1967, all the wood floors were standard and they would have been painted black. In 68, that was the first year that metal floors came standard, but you would have to option for the wood. Now, one big difference is the paint color of a wood floor in 68 to 72. You can see Jeremy still has the original 503 paint, where that 67 model year would have been painted black. Pretty dang cool that he's still got that. Now, you also might find on the bottom side of the wood slats here, they were date stamped. Somewhere on there, a lot of times it's just going to be too worn out from all the road grime over 50 years or so, but it's pretty cool when you do find something like that. Now, another difference between 67 and 68 would have been the reverse lights. Back in 67, the backup lights would have had a circle, or what we called a bullseye backup light, where in 68 to 72, they went more to this grid or waffle style. Why they did that? No idea. Alrighty, so you've seen a bunch of the differences on the exterior of a 68. Let's talk about the powertrains offered on the Chevrolet side. Well, in 68, the standard trucks would have came with an inline 250 or a small block 307. That could have been optioned for the bigger inline 6 292 or small block 327. But for the first time in Chevrolet history in the trucks, you could have got the 396 big block pumping out 325 horsepower. Now, one of the cool idiosyncrasies about the engine packages were the small block 327 or the big block 396, they came factory with electric choke carburetors. So on their instrument clusters, where the choke would be the manual choke rod, they would have had 3 different options of choke delete plates. All the rest of the engines would have had manual choke. Now, for transmissions, you would have had a 3-speed manual, a 4-speed manual, a power glide, a turbo 350, or a turbo 400. So a lot of options to choose from. I'm not talking about GMC yet. They're kind of their whole nother animal. So let's pop the hood and check out some of the things here. Well, if we look under the hood of this old 68, there were some subtle differences from the 67 model year. First thing being the frame. In 1968, there was now going to be a dimple or a cutout in the frame to accommodate the newer power steering boxes instead of the Ram Assist that were in 1967s. Now, the frames were a little bit narrower too to accommodate the big block 396. Now, Jeremy's converted a lot of his stuff over to Vintage Air, HEI, different things like that. Other options that you would have seen back in 1967 and 8, there was a splash guard at the bottom side of the grille in these trucks. But on the firewalls themselves, you can definitely tell a 67 and 8 apart because where the fuse panel goes through here. This is a very flat firewall, whereas 69 and up, they have a little protrusion out of here. And also where the emergency brake cable comes out is down lower because this is a hand-operated emergency brake in 67 and 68. So when we move to the interior, this is where all the changes happen. Let's just start with the doors. In 1968, the wing windows had changed from the 67s. They had a different handle, and the actual glass itself in 1967 did not have a hole in it, or this little button, whereas 68 to 72s did. Now, another thing you'd notice with the doors on that is the door hinges changed. It's hard to see these, but they are now have a small cutout at a 45-degree angle, where 1967s were just all squares. Now, the door panels, they pretty much stayed the same. Armrests were an option, but they were still the smaller, not the big thick ones like 69 to 72s had. The door handles and window cranks changed. They went to a more generic look and stayed that way through 72, where 67s had a more of a curvature to it. Another thing you'll see is the actual vehicle identification plate here. It was here, but then you had the General Motors badging down below this too. That was a 68 only option. Another thing you would notice was in 68, it still stayed with the hand-operated emergency brake. It stayed with this style of kick panel vent handle, and they stayed with the horizontal fuse panel box. Now, when it came to the instrument clusters, these were year specific to 1968. 67s were black and they had painted argent going around the outside. Now granted, some 68s did too, but one telltale sign is right here where it says wiper washer. In 1967, it only said wipers, and they changed the handles. They went through to a bigger rounded edge, where in 1967 they were a little bit smaller and the exterior had texture kind of like a quarter would have. Now in 1968, Jeremy's changed his column out, but in 1967 there would have been a hole in the column. I have no idea why they did that, but that was something that was changed in the 68 model year. Now another thing that I'll notice in this cab is the ashtray. This is a little bit smaller and it slides into the dash a little bit different than the 67 model year. The ignition is different. It's much bigger, a bigger bezel, and now you have an accessory option, and the cigar lighter is much bigger and it's recessed into the dash. 67 and 8s would have had a black heater face. Jeremy's converted his over to vintage air already. But the sun visor clips were also a different option. 1967, they went through and they connected towards the front of the truck, whereas 68, the clips actually go towards the back. Sun visors now were a thing where you had a passenger side option you could get, same with the passenger side mirror. The glove box door was new. Not only is the glove box door arm different than a 67, it is now painted the body color instead of being black with an argent border. Now when we look at the seats, they stayed as folders. Jeremy's obviously gone through and recovered his, but 67, 68, they would tilt, whereas the 69 model year and up, they were more stationary at that point. Also, the seat bases changed every 2 years on these trucks as well. So another big change in 68 was the seat belts. Now these are actually my seat belts out of my 71 GMC that Jeremy bought, but they moved to this more plastic style with the GM push button, whereas 67s were metal and they were a flapper style like an airline. And then, well, he hasn't got all the seat belt put in here yet, but the holes in 68 got much bigger than the 67 here. And if you actually pulled the seat belts out, there is a date stamping on the bottom of the seat belts, and that would help indicate what year your seat belts were too. Well, before I forget on the interior, another way to signify what year your cluster was, on the back of the printed circuit, it would have been date stamped on all 6 years of the Action Line series. Another thing that you would have found with seats, in 1967, all CST trucks would have came with buddy buckets, but starting in 1968, the seats would have came standard as a bench, but you could still order the buddy buckets, but that would have been the last year of them until they moved to console seats in 1969. Well, if we take a look at the roofline in Jeremy's truck, you'll notice it doesn't have a rear view mirror, which is not uncommon for a base model truck, but in 1967 that rear view mirror arm would have been black, but in 1968 they transitioned over to a chrome or a more stainless look, but again, another year specific to 1968. Something else that was year specific in 1968 were the center dog dish caps. Now they were argent silver, black, and red. If you had a fancier truck, you could have got them in stainless, or you could have got the full factory wheel covers. Now this should be kind of black in there. Mine are pretty worn out, but again, both year specific to 1968. All right, before I go, I figure out to give you a few specifics of El Guapo here because I know the questions will pop up in the comments. Now, El Guapo is sitting on a 5.7 static drop. Jeremy's gone through and put 2.5-inch drop spindles with 2-inch drop springs. He had 3s under it, but it was rubbing a little bit, so we brought it back up to 2-inch springs. On the rear, he's got 5-inch drop springs along with 2-inch drop blocks, and it is C-notched. Under the hood, he's got a beefed up, rebuilt 350 with Edelbrock intake, carburetor, HEI, and a pretty stout turbo 350 transmission. He's went through and put in a newer column shifter, and then when it comes to his wheel and tire combination, I know this is always a big one, especially to get this truck this low on static. He is running 15-inch torque thrust wheels. Now on the fronts, he's got 235 60-15s. These are BF Goodwrench, and then on the back, he's got 275 60-15s back there. But I tell you, this thing just has a sweet stance. I kind of hope I can get some of my trucks this way where I'm not like ripping the bottom side of the exhaust off because I live on a crappy dirt road. So here's the big question. Why did GM make so many changes every year to the Action Line series? And you know, that's a great question. I think in 1967, they were just trying to figure things out, and they had a lot of carryover of parts from the 66 model year. Then in 1968, I think they were really trying to improve safety, but truly it was probably just a bunch of drunk engineers sitting around the table on a Friday afternoon saying, hey, let's change a few things every year. That way, 50 years from now, guys are ordering the wrong parts, and some C10 truck nerd is gonna try to go through and figure out what we did. You know, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I want to give a big shout out to Jeremy for letting us have El Guapo for a few days to get this video finally shot. And if I missed anything, you know, I don't know everything, but if I missed any differences or your specifics on the 1968 model year, please type it down in the comments. I absolutely love learning about these trucks, but remember, I'm only talking about Chevys and C10s. We'll get to the GMCs a little later down the road. Well, if you guys haven't, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and make sure you come back, because next time we got to go through and find us an original 1969 Chevy C10 and figure out what they changed again. Well, I appreciate your time, and thanks for watching. Come on, dude. Everybody's got a weed eat. You know, everybody's got to do yard work, right? And I'm trying to film. Been waiting for days for out rain, but okay, I'm crabby. It said Chevrolet across the front, but one thing that you'll notice is a fly walking right across my lens. Thank you, jerk.